Hi everyone, Becky here, back to the textbook 顶石中文 Capstone Chinese. I thought about these exercises on page 35 and thereabouts. I'm not sure what to do with them. They're wanting me to write essays. I'm not entirely sure it's worthwhile me doing this while making YouTube videos because when I do writing, I do a lot of proofreading and editing and things like this, and it's incredibly boring. Maybe I can do one or two, but I don't have a strong desire to do that. You can see my reading on 简书. 简书, I'll show you. By reading, I mean writing. This is me on 简书, and you can read the articles I've written. Yeah, this one was when I used 10 different AIs to write an article on the same topic. And yeah, how long is that? Only 800 characters, so that one's relatively short for me. Yeah, some of them get blocked, which is a bit of an issue. But yeah, I have 50,000 characters. This is writing output. I'm okay at essay writing, so I feel like it's not hugely advantageous for me to practice that. I'm not very good, or at least I'm relatively not good at fiction. Yeah, fiction is more challenging for me. Non-fiction is usually all right. The main challenge with non-fiction is that you really need something like something you want to say, some kind of point you want to get across, and you carefully think about how to present it and so on. With non-fiction is still a bit of a challenge for me. Things like character development and so on, and lots of subtext and implied meaning. So I probably should write something, but with writing, there's a saying: if you want to write well, first you must have something you want to say, right? Before you can do anything, before you can actually do any good writing, you actually have to have something you want to actually say, right? You can't just I don't know, just make up something from nothing, right? You know, you need some idea, some sort of inspiration, a topic or prompt or something like this. Anyway, let's move on to Unit 2. 环保篇. All right, so we're talking about the environment and protecting the environment. 碳排放的蛋糕怎么切? All right, so 蛋糕 is obviously a metaphor, but I don't quite understand this metaphor. Sorry, let me just adjust everything. Sorry, my hand. All right. 碳排放. So carbon emissions, the cake of carbon emissions. Maybe they're talking about like a pie chart or something. And just that it's hard to measure or ascribe X to Y, because there's lots of different sources for carbon emissions. All right, 也许我应该用中文回答这些问题。课前思考：你了解碳排放吗？了解。我应该怎么回答这个问题？我就是判断自己的理解准不准确呢？了解。也许我可以告诉你我对碳排放有什么知识。碳排放，很多人类的活动会用能量，制造能量的过程，你会我怎么说？氧化什么燃料，对吗？不同的燃料有不同的影响。所以呢，碳这里就是二氧化碳的碳 ，carbon， 对吗？所以那种碳排放会影响 空气质量，也会加剧气候变暖那个巨大的难题，对吗？影响全世界的难题。无论是普通人的生活中，还是公司或者工厂那样的情况，也有那个电厂，电厂对吗？电厂他们排放的呃碳二氧化碳就会影响我们的环境，全世界的环境，嗯，也就会降低我们的生活质量，对吗？但是与此同时，很多活动你没有别的办法，你必须排放二氧化碳，嗯，所以你需要考虑做任何事情需要考虑呃，值不值得，需要考虑，你排放的那个二氧化碳，值得吗？有时候值得，有时候不值得。嗯，比如说开空调会消耗电能，对吗？呃，所以每次你打开空调，嘣就会排放二氧化碳，或者间接的排放二氧化碳。是电厂制造的那个电能，对吗？嗯，所以你需要考虑这个，值得吗？值得还是不值得？嗯，有的活动这比那个二氧化碳的排放比较低，比如看书比较低，嗯，制造一本书会消耗某种程度的那个二氧化碳，可是也会影响呃那个自然环境，因为需要砍树，那个呃树可以我作为或者变成那个纸，用所以那个过程很复杂。所以你认为看书是比较环保吗？你需要权衡很多方面，对吗？不应该忽视任何一个方面。可是在家里有一些家具，有一些有一些家电，他们会消耗大量电能，尤其是空调、热水器、吹风器。如果嗯，他们控制温度，让你的房间变得更热还是变得更冷，那应该更会消耗电能。冰箱也不是例外。一般来说，如果没有那个需求的话，没有需要的话，我不会开空调。如果我能打开窗户，那个更好。嗯。OK，面临这种，呃，那个二氧化碳排放的问题，不同的人有不同的解决办法。有的人就纯粹忽略这个问题，有的人就剑桥最重要的那个最可能我怎么表达这个排放二氧化碳量最多的嗯那个家电，比如空调、热水器之类的。嗯，有的人是非常绿色的，就在生活的所有方面考虑，我要开车吗？或者我可以走，也许比较方便，骑自行车。但是自行车就是制造这些也需要，嗯，需要。 通过一种制造过程，所以不是零，不是零排放的那个过程，不是零排放的选择。可是与此同时，嗯，开车会消耗你汽油，汽油燃烧后会呃制作会变成那种二氧化碳，二氧化碳就加剧呃气候变暖的问题。在嗯，在任何方面，你需要选择用方法 A，用方法 B，还是不做，对吗？就纯粹不做。大部分时候不做是最好的选择。我的意思，这里的意思，是从环保的角度来看，不做应该是最好的选择。你，嗯，你自己走路更好，然后你不去也好，但是很多事情你需要做，或者如果你什么都不做，那你为什么生活？你不用生活，所以你需要有权衡很多思考，对吗？很多方面值得考虑。嗯，也有的人其实没有对环保方面，没有看重环保，对吗？没有看重环保，就是24小时就连续不断的开空调，也许不管这个啊、这个的确对环境有害。嗯嗯，OK，也许随着人们生活的质量的提升，我们越来越多排放二氧化碳，负面影响我们的环境。嗯，如果是奢侈品，也许你不需要。全球气候变暖，真的有那么大危害吗？人类对此是否反应过度了？在我看来，我觉得那个负面影响不是立即的，对吗？所以很多人估计二氧化碳的排放，带来的那个影响，会影响我们的孩子、他们的孩子、孙子孙女，就会降低他们的生活质量，而且弥补很难，就不用就比较简单。所以我认为呃，你可以说危害，大危害，也许你可以说大危害，也许最重要的问题就是人们不太理解我们面临的那个危害。嗯，人们对此是否反应过度了？嗯，在我看来，呃，OK，有人他们非常绿色的，嗯，为了环保的原因，他们会影响一切生活，就就尽量降低它的排放。比如说，就洗澡的时候就用就旧水或者这类的吧，或者他们把桶子放在淋浴里，就积存他们的那个水，那个废水，那个废水可以浇滑这类的。嗯，我有的一些朋友我他们就是这样，就想方设法尽量少用一切，无论是什么水源还是 电能，无论是如何，他们会尽量呃降低他们的消耗。可是，呃，我在那个环境中，我认为我不太接受不了，有点严格，长期来说应该有点严格。可是我还有其他的朋友，他们嗯低估那个气候变暖带来的那个危害。嗯，我认为是一个巨大的挑战，这就是我们年代应该解决，但是我们有一点甩锅，有点甩锅。也我小时候就读小学的时候，呃那时候我们知道这个问题，我们知道如何解决这个问题，但是我们无所谓，我们不无动于衷，就觉得我需要牺牲我们生活中的一部分，而且很多大公司他们不愿意降低他们的利润，所以他们想方设法，呃，找个借口，就不在乎这些问题。可是，气候变暖的问题仍然存在，仍然影响我们一切的生活。我们看了很多新闻，新闻上我们发现很多，关于呃生活或者异常气候现象，对吗？无论是在加拿大、美国、澳大利亚，也许中国也有更多更多的台风在这里。无论是在哪里，这些嗯，对极端的现象，现在没有那么少见的。小时候，对啊，也就是一生中可能出现一次，现在是每年出现一次。嗯嗯，我认为最重要的解决这个问题的，嗯，方法就是，政府应该，要求那些大公司，那些大公司，就尤其是那个汽油公司这类的，大公司应该受限制，什么样的限制？对此我不是政治家，所以我不能说但是他们的责任，公司的责任比较大，在我看来，嗯，也无论你像我的非常有责任心的朋友，就就是差不多差不多不排放二氧化碳这类的，或者你纯粹不存在，这类的，就你仍然只是一个人，你只能影响自己的那个二氧化碳的排放。但是公司的影响是巨大的。嗯，我认为那个普通人可以少买不需要的东西，这些垃圾。这个好漂亮，我把它放那儿。呃，那 OK，然后一个星期之后就扔掉。圣诞礼物和生日礼物，也是那样吧，呃就买垃圾，就给他，就表达自己的那个感情。其实实际上他不在乎，你也不在乎，这些垃圾我们不需要，垃圾礼物我们谁要？呃，也许那些忽视这个问题那样的人，看那个非常非常严格的那个人，就认为我不想像他们那样。其实我在中间，我认为我比平均，我的二氧化碳比平均低一些，可是我看一些朋友他们就过度严格，我 接受不了这样的生活方式。我认为那些忽视一切的那个人看那些降低自己的生活质量的那样的人，就认为我不想像那样的人生活，就是太辛苦。但是我认为我鼓励他们尽量降低他们的二氧化碳。我有科学背景，我对此呃我对此问题，在某种程度的理解，对吗？我不能忽视，不是科学家可能是错的，不是他们犯错，他不是科学不是那样。嗯，就是全世界的科学家都一致认为有这个问题，从80年代一直到现在，就有一致没有变化。呃，也一贯认为我们大家应该都降低二氧化碳的排放，但是政治家认为我们不应该那样做。你认为全面禁止燃油车，生产可行吗？The production of 燃油车the 燃油 refers to a family of combustible materials like petrol, gas, diesel. 嗯、如果全面禁止，可行吗？其实我真的认为可行。会解决这个问题呢？我不确定，我需要看数据或者那个数学模型，就可能发现有没有根据，对吗？如果有根据的话，如果数学模型就说就禁止燃油车生产的话，我们的轨迹会这样，会这样。我不知道。呃，而且也那个制造汽车的时候，也需要也带来可观的影响。所以不仅仅是那个排放，那个车尾的排放，也有制造汽车的那个排放。所以你需要从全面的角度来看这个问题。需要看科学家说什么，对此说什么。好像我们一会儿就会发现，可行，可行，可行意味着能做还是如果做，呃，会带来好处呢？这是一个好的问题。我觉得很多事情你可以做，那不意味着那是一个好主意。OK，我们看一看。All right, all right. I've spoken enough Chinese. There's my Chinese. Um, yeah, talking about the environment is quite common on HSK exams. Yeah, it's quite a topic at the moment. China is in the news recently for building very large farms of solar power panels. My understanding is there's one like not that far from here. There's like a really big one offshore. I live near the beach, and there's one, yeah, offshore. But yeah, I hear stories of anti-desertification efforts in Inner Mongolia. I hear stories in both Mongolia, not Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia and Xinjiang about like huge solar panels, like whole farms of them. You see photos of like farms converted into like solar covered in solar panels with the animals underneath the solar panels and so on. You also see them like self-cleaning and things like this. Yeah, so you need to kind of a little bit keep up with the news on this, because this is the kind of topic they love talking about on HSK exams, which presumably is why it's in this textbook. 2009年12月7日 That's a while ago now, isn't it? What are we talking about? 举世瞩目的联合国气候变化峰会在丹麦首都this is, how do you say Copenhagen in Chinese? 哥本哈根召开 All right, so we're talking about a global United Nations climate change panel in Copenhagen in 2009. 来自192个国家和地区的代表参与了这次大会。国际社会希望在本次大会上商定下一步温室气体减排的方案。All right, so 192 countries and regions. So it's basically the whole world. If it includes countries like Russia, USA, many European countries, China, India, and so on, it's going to cover the most relevant countries. So they signed it saying they're going to reduce greenhouse gases. So let's see how it evolved over time. Yeah, we've got a Trump administration coming up, and the Trump administration wasn't very favorable to climate change. All right, so 国际社会希望在本次大会上商定一下sorry, we already did that one. 方案就2012到2020年全球应对气候变化问题达成一项新协议。OK， 然而在历时近2周的会议中周 here is not week. 周 here is a cycle. So on the previous 2 cycles of the meeting, 参会人数已经远远超过了官方注册的15000人。会场内外what is that character? I don't know this one. 什么颜四起 I don't recognize this character. 一片喧嚣直到接近尾声代表们仍然没有达成共识。What is that character? Shao Yan? What do you think it is? Xiao Saltpeter. I feel like I know this one. I think I vaguely have studied it. 硝烟四起. Is it a metaphor? There might be a metaphor here. 硝烟. We have a metaphor on our hands, do we? I'm not sure. 硝烟四起. So does it represent 硝烟四起? Does it represent hubbub? 喧嚣? Does it mean 喧嚣? Is it a metaphor for 喧嚣? All right. 记者. We have an interview on our hands. All right. What twist? 记者. 这次哥本哈根给人的感觉一直是尖锐激烈的争吵。到底在吵什么? All right, so we're back in Copenhagen, Denmark for the 2009 meeting, or at least we're discussing it. 丁仲礼. I don't know who 丁仲礼 is. Well, I guess we're going to find out. 其实吵的问题很简单，就是今后不同的国家才能排放多少二氧化碳。Okay, I mean, sure. Sorry, how do I do this? I'm afraid. Yeah, I remember it's a real issue because a lot of countries they're all countries are trying to optimize their own carbon outputs and so on, and they're kind of ignoring how problematic climate change would be to every single country. There's no real exceptions. It's going to cause economic disaster if people just let it run rampant. But at the same time, yeah, every politician, like the science is, the science. That was done back in the 80s, basically. It's just more nuanced now. Um, the politicians are still trying to optimize for their constituents, right? And this sometimes means, like, even Australia was pretty bad at this, not joining the Kyoto Protocol for quite a long time. And yeah, I forget when it was. Was it the Rudd administration when Australia joined the Kyoto Protocol? I forget. But um, but yeah, I remember different countries struggling for different things. So something like Australia was surprisingly allowed to emit huge amounts of greenhouse gases, as if somehow the globe knows where the carbon comes from. And places like China, which is big in number in terms of population, like basically all the rich countries said, you're not allowed to have the quality of life of Western countries, and it's been quite problematic. You know, yeah, China and India especially is like, you're not allowed. You're not allowed the quality of life of people in Western countries, and that probably didn't go down so well. Yeah, once you have this kind of quality of life, you're kind of thinking, I'm not going to give it up, right? I'm not going to give it up voluntarily, even if it is to give our children and their children a better future. I'm not going to give it up. Anyway, 记着，这个排放多少，实质又是什么？All right. 这个排放多少? So I'm not entirely sure what 这个 means here. So is this like the global emission of CO2? 丁仲礼，简单一句话就是说，这个问题是和能源问题联系在一起的，和发展问题是修亲相关的。修亲 is that a word? 修亲 rest relative. 修亲 what is 修亲oops. What am I supposed to do? I'll just handwrite it. 修 oh, sorry, can you see? 修亲修七 I'm not wrong, right? It's usually it's qi. No wonder it didn't come up. 修七 okay. 修一亲戚的戚亲戚的戚修七修七相关 it comes together. 休戚相关休 so you probably encounter 休 in rest 休息 it means something like lean against a tree or something like this, right? Or is that just the description of the character? Yeah, maybe it doesn't mean that at all, does it? No, it's just one of these things when they teach you how to handwrite the character, they say, there's a person resting against a tree. And maybe I just remember that and someone teaching me that at some point. And yeah, it doesn't seem to mean that at all. All right. So presumably it's just a fancy way of saying intimately, common cause. 休戚相关. What is 休戚? Joys and sorrows. That is not obvious at all. Whoa, all right. 休戚相关和发展问题是休戚相关的，所以说争论半天就是我还能排放多少，我还能使用多少能源。Yeah, this is kind of the thing. Like all the countries were squabbling over optimizing their carbon emissions. Everyone's trying to maximize their carbon emissions rather than, like trying to make the world a better place. 记者，您的意思就是这个排放就意味着未来的发展权。So, all right. Is this an actual interview? Yeah, maybe I should go and watch the actual interview before delving into this. You know what? I'm going to do it. Yeah, you can find the video on YouTube. Here it is. So this is the interview here. Can you see that? Yes. So Ding Zhongli, this is Ding Zhongli. Ding Zhongli gave a very passionate interview, let's put it that way. Yeah, this was not really anything like what we're seeing in the textbook. Maybe the textbook has a very polished version of this interview. Yeah, he's criticizing quite harshly developed countries, and in particular for giving like carbon emissions restrictions on China that are kind of very disproportionate to what the developed countries were giving themselves, and he described that as kind of unfair and so on. He also pointed out that it's developed countries for the last 100+ years that have been emitting carbon and causing this problem, and China's just only recently becoming developed. And this is back here. It says 2010. Oh, right. The interview was 2010. The Copenhagen meeting was 2009, wasn't it? All right. Yeah, he really didn't he was very direct. Let's say he was quite direct about his response. Yeah, he also said he wrote this paper here. So this paper here, it was open access. So I assume that means, there's his email address. Go ask him. Like, go tell him about the textbook. You're in my textbook. Yeah, so okay, 丁仲礼、段小南、何全胜、张志强. Yeah, this is a very common name in Chinese. 张志强. All right, so he said in his paper he was very, I don't know, harsh with his wording. Maybe that's the way. He was very critical of the IPCC in particular. So I feel like at some point we should actually just read this paper. It's only like 13 pages. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be especially hard to read, but I'm not sure. Yeah. And Ding Zhongli, he said he has a geology background. He's a geologist. So does it say it in his credentials here, his affiliation? 中国科学院地质 yeah, geology 地质与地球物理研究所. So geology and earth physics. So from Beijing at the Academy of Sciences, Chinese Academy of Sciences. Yeah, this is getting interesting because what the textbook is presenting us with, and what the interview had, are not the same thing. And maybe the paper is yet another version of events. There's like 3 versions of events we're going to have to sift through. All right, now 1 second. Yeah, and obviously I can't just show you a YouTube video on YouTube, someone else's YouTube video. Yeah, or Chinese news on YouTube. You'll have to go and watch that yourself. But yeah, the way he spoke in that video, it was very passionate, and it wasn't the way it's being presented in this textbook. It's kind of simple like this. But I do know what 蛋糕 means now. 蛋糕, 蛋糕. So it's representing the carbon emissions that we of the whole world. Should we try to keep it under 2 degrees, like the global warming, keep global warming 2 degrees or under? There's a certain limit to carbon emissions, and yeah, so the countries kind of have their different slice of carbon emissions. Whoops. I need to mute that, it seems. Yeah, I don't even know why I had the sound on. Oh, I had the sound on because I was watching the news. All right. So this really changes my perspective entirely of how I should interpret this, because I feel like this version has been modified from reality. Yeah, it's not this kind of... He didn't speak like this at all. I was surprised that Ding Zhongli used very simple language, and very, very, I don't know, passionate. The way he was describing things, almost argumentative. And yeah, I feel like none of this here is what he said. But all right. 您的意思就是这个排放就意味着未来的发展权，也发展权 the right to develop. In the video, they talk about 发展权, but also 排放权, the right to emit carbon dioxide. They presented it as if it was a fundamental right, not like you're throwing rubbish on the ground. It's like your right to litter. 丁中理，这个是肯定的。Yeah, this is more like what he would speak in the video. It's very short, somewhat certain, very certain of himself. 记住，这个排放权对于普通国民又意味着什么？丁重理，意味着生活的改善，意味着国家的发展。你的福利能不能进一步的增加？也意味着你有没有工作。I don't know. I could imagine him saying this. Maybe there's like a bit of the interview he left off, but he spoke very, very simply like this. He wasn't quoting Chongyus and poetry and things like this. He was speaking very simply, which is often what people are doing when they're like, so what scientists do when they speak with scientists and what scientists do when they speak with non-scientists can be quite different. And yeah, you're often instructed to kind of tone down the jargon a lot. 您理解的公平是什么? Yeah, he did get asked this question, or at least something in that ballpark. 人与人之间应该有个大致相等的排放空间. Yeah, so the background here was that China was allowed to emit carbon to a very limited extent to other countries, especially developed countries. To my knowledge, China still counts as a developing country, right? Sure, large parts of China are now quite well developed, but yeah, there's still poverty issues in China and so on. It's better than before, but you know, there's still work to be done. All right. So here we're treating people as more or less equal. More or less equal, treating people around the world equally and so on. 记住，不过这次的方案并没有对发展中国家不好意思 I always get this word mixed up. 对发展中国家，发展中 yeah. So 中国 is obviously a word meaning China, but here it's 发展中国家，发展中国家 developing countries. Developing countries. So Definitely at that time, China was considered a developing country. It was it was all in the news and so on, like this big argument that America was emitting so much carbon, and all the other countries kind of have to take a big hit because America likes being, I don't know, emitting a lot of carbon. 这次的方案并没有对发展中国家提出要求，也没有要求您减多少，不是吗？ All right, so the journalist actually did push back a little bit, not much, but a little bit on his arguments. So this is a little bit like confrontational. It's like, I'm questioning your conclusions. All right, 丁仲礼，他确实，他还是发展中国家，他确实是没有对发展中国家减排设定绝对量。Okay, so Ta is not developing country. Ta is the agreement they arrived at in Denmark in 2009. So it didn't set absolute definitions and limits on developing countries. 但是他对发达国家设定了减排标准。中期2020年有25%到40%的减排，到2050年，要有80%到95%的减排。I can tell you, he didn't cite statistics in the video. He likely did it in his paper. I feel like when I took a glance at that paper just now, there was like pages and pages of statistics. So that's probably where it came from. 25. Yeah, here it is. 2020年在1999年的基础上减排 blah blah blah. Yeah. So he does say it in the paper. So maybe like reverse engineered from the paper added to his interview or something like this. But yeah, I'm not sure what to say here because this is not the transcript of his interview. 到2050年要有80%到95%的减排。No, he didn't say that. He said China should. Did he say that? I remember he said something noteworthy that the Chinese government should aim for 80% of developed countries in terms of emissions. Yeah, maybe that's what that is. 但是它有一个总量，就是全世界二氧化碳的排放总量，统统放在8000亿吨这个大盘子里。那么，等于这个蛋糕的数量是确定下来了，也就是说，今后发达国家的人，均排放权 ，yeah, they use this term a lot. 排放权 the right to emit carbon. I don't think it's a right. Why would that be a right? There's like the right to litter. If the right to litter, 扔垃圾, if that's not a right, then why is the right to carbon emissions a right? 排放权是发展中国家的2.3倍，2.3倍。Did he say that? I thought he said like 7 or up. 尽管减80%，一步一步往下减，但是发达国家基数大，是发展中国家的4.8倍。Yeah, this is what he was quite passionate about. He almost felt like offended by the notion that developed countries were treating their populace as superior to Chinese and so on. You know what I mean? Because ascribing them greater rights to carbon emissions. Yeah. 如果 国际上对今后的排放进行严格的限定的话，那么二氧化碳的排放权就会变成一种非常稀缺的、不可多得的商品，不可多得的商品。all right，就是你想要排有可能，就是你想要排有可能。What does that mean? But apparently the interviewer gets interrupted here. There was at one point when he did interrupt the interviewer. He just shouted over her. 你不够排，你就得买。So if you can't emit all the carbon that's allocated to you, you can sell. No, you can buy it. 你不够. Oh, sorry, no. If you don't have the rights, you can buy it from other countries. 前提是你承认二氧化碳排放配额是一种稀缺商品。So 稀缺 like scant or what's the word? When you have an insufficient amount of something or a restricted amount of something, scarce commodity. 记者真金白银，金白银，真金白银，金白银。What is 金白银? Gold, gold, white, silver. Is this a metaphor? 真金白银。Is there a 成语 here? 真金白银. Maybe there's a 成语. Like true gold and silver, 真金白银. Might be a metaphor that the ability to sell or buy carbon emission rights. Yeah, 真金白银 is as valuable as gold, maybe. I presume that's the idea. 那么这个8000亿吨分配的过程当中，多分一点，少分一点，是多大的利益？ Yeah, I think he said that from the interview. I think he said those words. 记者他现在提出了一个概念，就是说，我不管你是人均，还是说贫富，现在只以碳排放大国来算。So yeah, I'm not entirely sure what this is meaning. What do you think? 他现在提出 Okay, first of all, 他 what is 他? I don't know. 他提出概念，提出设计 ，maybe it should be 设计什么概念？就是说，我不管你是人均还是说贫富，现在只以碳排放大国来算。What do you reckon that means? 只以let's continue. 丁仲礼根据 G8的方案，27个发达国家取走的是多少蛋糕？取走的是44%。发达国家多少人口？1亿人口。余下的55亿人口56%的蛋糕。那么你说公平不公平？ Yeah, that's more like what he was arguing. It's like yeah, the rich, wealthy, developed countries were taking more cake than they were giving to other people. 记住哈，这个方案本身就没有接人口计算。It's not a question, but okay. 那你算算账，假如告诉你中国从2020年以后，每年花1万亿人民币去购买二氧化碳排放权，你会怎么想？是不是有失公许？失公许是不是有失公许？What do you reckon 失公许 means? Oh, 公许 Oh, what have I done? All right. So there's some sort of saying here. This one. 施公, huh? 公. Where'd my 施 go? 施公许哪个许？这个许。Oh, it's not 许 it's yun. That's why I didn't do it. 施公允，允许的允，公允。施公允。Fair and equitable, even-handed, just and sound. So 施 would be to lose it, but probably just unfair. 施公允. All right, so there's these countries that are not getting allocated their fair share of carbon emission rights, are having to buy them from wealthier countries, kind of thing. Yeah, it's the wealthy that make the rules, and the rules are suited very much for the wealthy, unsurprisingly. 换句话说，我对公平的理解，我把排放权视为发展权，视为基本人权。所以人与人之间应该有个大致相当的排放空间，维护发展中国家的利益，保障发展中国家的发展权利，落实联合国千年发展计划。这难道不是人类的利益吗？ Okay, lots of flowery words, but it just means it's unfair. 记着，假如像您所说的，现在这个方案，发展国家又不接受的话，如果他就这么拖下去 ，Yeah, I remember she said this. This is where she pushed back. So this, the Ding Zhongli was very passionate and like it should be the same. And the journalist was like, okay, but if you're in a situation where you're trying to advocate for China having the same, or Chinese people having the same right for people in other countries, then what happens is that the other countries would not accept it, right? And you need their acceptance. You need them to participate, or everything, or it drags on. So he did get faced this question. This is quite a challenging question because you have to accept a level of unjust treatment, unequal, unjust treatment. 这几年下去，会不会温室效应导致的全球变暖的状态更糟糕了？听众里，我很乐观。He did say this. He said he was optimistic because humans we're not trying to save the planet, we're trying to save humans. And then he actually talked about very close to human extinction or something like this. I wouldn't say extinction, but somewhat using a metaphor in that ballpark. 我研究几亿年以来的环境气候演化，这不是人类成就地球的问题，是人类成就自己的问题。Yeah, that's what he said in the video. 跟成就地球是没有关系的。地球用不着你成就。Okay, so the Earth is fine with or without us. It really doesn't care. 地球比现在在高10几度的时候有的是。Okay, so this is like even if the temperature went up 10 degrees, the Earth will be fine. The Earth will still live on. Humans, maybe not. 地球二氧化碳的浓度比现在高10倍的时候，也有的是。地球不都是什么演化过来的，都好好的。毁灭的只是物种。So this is in this hypothetical, right? So we're talking about the extinction of species. Were this hypothetical situation to arise? So he's using it as a kind of figure of speech to point out that the Earth does not really need us. We need to save ourselves. And that's why he is 乐观 optimistic. Yeah. 毁灭的只是物种，毁灭的是人类自己 ，right？所以是人类如何成就人类，不是人类如何成就地球。OK， 到底能不能成就自己？最核心的东西，最终取决于什么？英中里，取决于文化文明。人类应对各种挑战的时候，人们有一种更具包容性的、更有弹性的一种文明的产生，或者是我们现有文明有很好的发展。All right, I'm not sure how consistent this was with the interview. Yeah, this one 是发展中国家的7.58倍 right? So here he's talking about like historically, right? So yeah, I shouldn't just play a YouTube video, but maybe I can
发展中国家的
talking historically about the difference in carbon emissions between like China and developed countries and so on. Yeah, so here he mentions the 4.8. So that was in the textbook. So hopefully I don't get in trouble for showing bits.
要减，但是你基数大呢？
你基数大呀，但是你基数大呀。
你的基数是发展中国家的4.8倍。
你的基数是发展中国家的4.8倍。So let's compare that to what it says in the textbook. Here. 但是一步一步往下减，但是发达国家基数大，是发展中国家的4.8倍。Yeah. So 基数 what do you reckon 基数 is? It's like the base number, right? So rich people are saying, oh, we're giving ourselves, more carbon emission rights, this sort of thing. Yeah, this sort of thing. But all right. Yeah, it's not very consistent, the textbook with what he says, but yeah, he calls it a 陷阱, like a trap or a pitfall or something. Did they leave that part out? Maybe they left that part out of the textbook version. Yeah, he does mention this one, this 稀缺的商品, but he doesn't say precisely what it says in the textbook. Here, here, he didn't say this, or at least not in that video. 你不够排，你就得买。前提是你承认二氧化碳排放，配额是一种稀缺商品。Yeah, so it's a scarce commodity, right? So there is some monetary value to like this carbon emissions because it's scarce. It's limited at, what was it, 8,000? 8,000, no, it'd be, what was it? Did it say somewhere? 8,000亿. Here, 8,000亿. 8,000亿. What's that? That is 800 billion. 800 billion tons of carbon emissions. That's a lot. That really is a lot of carbon emissions. 800 billion tons. Like how do we not stay below that? Wow, all right. He does say this first part. Yeah, it's just in a different order in the video and in the textbook. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff you were seeing in the news back when this was in the news. Yeah, what is it, 10, 15 years ago now, and trying to limit it to 2 degrees. And this is China here, and this is America over here. Is this per capita? 世界人口大国 blah 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 人均累计排放. So this is the total emissions from countries per capita from here, from 1900 to 2005. Obviously, the population of these countries has changed over time from 1900 to 2005. So I'm not precisely sure how they did a per capita of this. Is it just like the total carbon emissions over that time divided by the current population? Maybe. But anyway, what China has emitted versus the USA and other. Why is Canada so far up there? Wow. Canada? Oh yeah, Canada's very cold though. And there's a lot of you have to burn things like log fires and things like that. Hopefully it's improved, but wow. England, I'll read that. Is that Germany? I think it's Germany. 什么俄罗斯 Russia, France, Japan, Italy. I can't read this. Oh, Mexico. Wow, Mexico. I didn't expect Mexico to be so far up. Brazil, Indonesia, India. Yeah, India, wow. India is the most populous country in the world now. Overtook China not that long ago. Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Yeah. But China's on the rise. I feel like this is out of date. So this was actually 20 years ago now. Over 20 years ago, I feel like this would have gone up a lot. Yeah. We'll have to, I don't know, I'm not up to date. And we are talking about relatively old statistics. Yeah, here he's arguing that historically, 我历史上比你少排很多吧. So it's like historically, China hasn't emitted very much. And yeah, and then you kind of agreeing to this very low carbon emissions. And yeah, I feel like China at the time was very like adamant on developing Yeah, it's not something you're going to easily accept. Yeah, this is where it gets a little bit emotional, right? 中国人是不是人? So he's using this kind of sort of very simple language to kind of carry his emotions and meaning here. He's talking about, like it's a rhetorical question, of course. Chinese people, and yeah, and therefore have the same rights as other people in the world, and therefore should be ascribed the same amount of carbon emissions as other people. And when developed countries, especially America, Australia's not doing very good either. I'm from Australia. Australia did really badly with this, considering how important it is. Yeah, trying to ascribe yourself greater rights than other people, it really is a bit of a problem. Yeah, so this is where he talks about using a country. So one country is equivalent to another country as the unit. And yeah, as opposed to doing one person equivalent to another person, then which should have the rights, which should be the basis for rights. But there are some very, very small countries in the world. I think he mentions next Monaco in particular. Yeah, Monaco 多少人? Monaco 多少人?
那我们中国跟莫纳哥比，
我们中国跟摩纳哥比行不行? Yeah, so comparing China to Monaco, is it reasonable? Again, it's another rhetorical question. It's pointing out the irrationality of just treating countries as countries rather than collections of people when it comes to this policy. Yeah, here there's a little bit.
提出的一个概念就是说，
我甚至提出了一个概念，
我不管你是人均
Yeah, this is in the textbook. 我不管你是人
还
均
是说贫富，
还是贫富。
在只以碳排放大国。
Yeah, this one. 现在只以碳排放大国为界限。What does the textbook here say? This is really one of the hardest things, but it also gets you engaged in the topic, like comparing the textbook version with the original version. They don't use the same version. All right. So according to the textbook, 他现在提出的一个概念，就是说我不管。Okay, first of all, the journalist was quoting him, right? Anyway, 就是说我不管你是人均还是说贫富，现在只以碳排放大国来算。What do you reckon it means? 来算 is to count. I'm not entirely sure what it means. What does it originally say? 现在只以碳排放大国为界限。大国为界限。界限 is like boundary. What do you think? What do you think this is about? Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. But here in the interview, she doesn't say 来算, she says 来界限. So this is demarcation line, right? So 现在 my phone just answered a question. I don't know, I must have pushed a button or something. Yeah, so what were we saying? Yeah, 界限. So it's the demarcation line. Okay, 以碳排放大国来界限. So, oh yeah, so she does talk about in the interview that it only applied to the heavy polluters or something. But I feel like there's a bit more practical issues. You can't just ignore the line. You can't just ignore these rules not applying. Yeah, so it is being edited a little bit, but he does mention the 44% statistics. So the argumentation is that there's a limited pie, or a limited cake in this case, carbon emissions that we can allocate to each country. And the G8 countries, there's 27 of them, and they allocated themselves 44%. And that's an issue, right? That's like disproportionate to their population, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so he says this almost character for character exactly the same. There's a few slight differences. But yeah, so his argumentation is, so the journalist pushes back on him. She's actually quite an interesting journalist, because she's pushing back on him. She's pushing back on his claims, saying, you know, like, well, the conclusions don't apply to China, right? It only applies to wealthy countries and so on. So yeah, the big countries that are the big emitters, and he's pushing back on it and saying, okay, but these big countries are allocating themselves too much, right? Even though like China's not involved, etc., etc. Like it sort of disregards these huge, like if everyone were to follow like these developed countries and so on, it's there would not be enough cake. There would be not be enough to go around. Okay, so that's the logic there. Okay, that kind of makes sense, right? All right. Yeah, at this point it gets rather heated, and he's like challenging Angela Merkel. It's like, you should go and ask Angela Merkel, who was the leader of Germany at the time, right? I'm not up to date on German politics.
有机会我要问问发达国家的领导人本人。
Yeah, go ask her in particular. Yeah. Go ask her in particular whether or not this is fair. So he does get a bit argumentative / passionate here. Yeah, so the journalist mentions 7 different policies or papers or whatever, agreements, and what's happening is he says he's reviewed them and he thinks the IPCC is the most reasonable. But the IPCC one is the one he's criticizing the most in this video. Yeah. 其他的方案是越来越黑。Hey here presumably means bad. Yeah, at this point in the video, they had a kind of interlude, and they just described this kind of ethical problem in this policy. Sorry, my lunch arrived. I'm kind of eating my lunch. I'll try to keep my lunch off screen while I do this. Yeah, so the journalist is pointing out how he is very directly criticizing the IPCC.
为什么不能指责？
为什么不能指责? Why should we not criticize? And
科
this
学
is
就是可以批评。
yeah, 科学就是可以批评的. Except this is not science, it is government policy, right? International policy.
既然你承认你是科学，
既然你承认你是科学, okay.
你就要坚持的。
What does 你是科学 mean? I don't know. You are science. 你就得要经受的 what? 经受得住人家的批评。你就得要经受得住人家的批评。Yeah, for scientists, I mean, not just average people's abuse, but scientists, have to go through scientific critique and so on. Yeah, so here he mentions his paper, and this is the paper. So we should actually read this paper.
的文章，我就是直接批评。
我就是直接批评 IPCC. All right, I'm kind of curious if, like, how he critiqued the IPCC. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, this bit here.
的文章，我就是直接批评。
而且我看到您的措辞，
我看到你的措辞, So I saw your wording in this paper, right?
其实是很激烈的。
其实是很激烈的。So it's like very strong wording I'm expecting in this paper. I hope so. It sounds interesting. Yeah, so he's arguing that China in 2020 and onwards buying carbon emission rights is rather unfair. Yeah, so the journalist pushes back yet again. She does her job quite well. This is maybe back when journalists did push back on people. Maybe it's changed. She criticizes him a bit. Yeah, 科学家在谈论。
用比较激烈的带有。
Yeah, she talks about his approach in here. In here. His wording in here, and saying it's a bit aggressive even, and whether or not that's appropriate for a scientist.
有情绪色彩的字眼，这样是否合适？
I missed that.
问题的时候，为什么要用比较激烈的、带有情绪色彩的字眼？
带有情绪色彩的，
这样是否合？
Yeah, 带有情绪色彩的字眼。Okay, what is it? 字眼? I don't know the word 字眼. Shall we look it up? 字眼. Wording. Oh, it's another way of saying wording. 措辞字眼. Okay, they're synonyms.
合适。
Yeah, 这样是否合适? So she's talking about the wording in this paper, whether or not it's reasonable or if it's too strong. All right, interesting. Yeah, this is really interesting, right? So he sort of fires back at the journalist. It's like, if you use gentle words, people will just ignore you, right? You say something is unfair, you'll get ignored. So, 我必须用非常激烈的语言，引起别人的重视, right? 引起别人的重视. So yeah, basically, if he didn't use that strong language, people would just ignore him. Let's see. I've got to read that paper, see what's in there. Yeah, so here he talks about, I don't know, his suggestions, advice to the Chinese government.
对中国政府的建议，中国政府应该制定一个雄心勃勃的
formulate an ambitious long-term emissions promise, 承诺. Yeah, so this is back in 2009, 2010. So it's, what are we, 2026. That's 15 years ago, right? So did it happen? Well, what certainly happened in the meantime is that China grew a lot and emitting more and more carbon. The infrastructure such as solar power, wind power is growing a lot, but it is yet to kind of topple coal and other things. It's kind of improving though, and there is a chance that it's going to start going down again. It's still till today, it's still, carbon emissions have still been rising. So it's like China is not just like taking the emissions and turning it into non-carbon. The emissions are kind of we're growing as well. There's like a double whammy kind of thing.
排放的承诺，这个重新排放的承诺，
Okay.
就是一句话，
什么话？
从1990年到2050年，
从1990年到2050年. So that's 2050年 is no, not 25, 24 years in the future, is it?
中国的人均排放量
人均排放量坚决
不超过发达国。
Yeah, this one. So he's talking about the per capita emissions in China. This is his proposal, should not exceed that of the developed countries, 80%, right? It's 80% of developed countries. Presumably that's 80% of the 80% of the per capita in developed countries. Yeah, which it would imply like developed countries would have to significantly reduce their carbon emissions. I mean, ideally, they should do that regardless of China or anything, really. It's just make the world a better place and make it more hospitable for our children and subsequent generations. But if you don't have this kind of we should help our children attitude, then, you know, yeah, you need policy and so on to do that for you. You know, maybe, yeah, this is tricky because if China actually did this and reached 80% of international, like developed countries, which sounds reasonable, right? But if this actually happened without the developed countries significantly dropping their emissions, then yeah, we're done for.
我讲同期北平的80%，不管你怎么减排，
不管oh, look how aggressive that was. 不管你怎么减排, regardless of how you reduce emissions,
我都要比你少。
我都要比你少. Okay, so it's an interesting policy. So if America comes along and says, "That's it, we're going to crush climate change. We're going to win the war on climate change." If I use the American vernacular, you're going to win the war on things in America. So you're winning the war on climate change. So if America decides to do that one day, who knows? Then yeah, China should just say slightly below that. So if they decide to hit it hard and drop down, China will follow, is what he's proposing. This does suggest a kind of reactive stance, whereas China nowadays feels like it's more leading the way. Yeah, more proactive in terms of building solar panels and so on. At the same time, from a country's perspective, it is the largest polluter. To my knowledge, it's beyond USA nowadays. That's my understanding. I'm not up to date. I'm not sure if I memorize things exactly, I should say. Yeah. Yeah, he's also talking about infrastructure, that China doesn't have the infrastructure, or at least at the time. Yeah, so you can't just use solar panels or solar powered electricity if you don't have solar panels, etc., etc. Yeah, that was the end of that one. There's not much else to say. There's a second part here. So it says part 5 of 5. There are actually 5 videos in this series. So there was an interview before this interview. All right. So the journalist asked him about 公平, fairness, and what he considers fair, and he's talking about 排放权, so this kind of emissions rights, and considering it the same as development rights. So yeah, so if you're restricting China's emissions, then you're kind of restricting China's development, and likewise for other countries. Yeah, she pushes back on him again, right? It's a really interesting interview, actually. She pushes back on him again and says, hang on, aren't you like a scientist? Like she's got a geology background, right? Right? That's his background. So she pushes back on him, as journalists should do, I think. That's the job of journalists and so on. So she pushes back on him and says, you're talking about government policy and things like that. Is this appropriate? And to a certain extent, I kind of agree that like science should really be science, and politicians who generally tend to be better at politics, yeah, should probably stick to politics. However, it really overlaps a lot because policy informs your research with things like climate change and whatnot, climate change research. If you want to model a certain policy, or even one that's not proposed, you may have like hypothetical policies, or even some, you like for the sake of modeling, you take it to an extreme or something like this even. This is the worst case scenario, this is average, this is best case, etc., etc. And yeah, so it's very hard as a human to know, or as a scientist to know what's going to happen if we do nothing, if we don't adopt appropriate policy, and yeah, and say nothing about it, right? A lot of scientists are like that. A lot of scientists become vegetarian or something like this because, you know, kind of scientists don't like to remain ignorant, and therefore when they hear about what happens to animals, yeah. Actually, she pushed back again. So she's not really aggressive or anything like this. She's really an interesting journalist, right? So she pushes back again. She's talking about that. So rather than as a scientist, you shouldn't necessarily have China as the center of your mind or the focus, etc., but rather, yeah, 人类共同利益的, so mankind as a whole. So yeah, again, there's quite a lot of back and forth here. It's really quite interesting. Yeah, so he's came back to this with a kind of mentioning the United Nations and it's for all mankind and so on. But I feel like he didn't have a really great explanation, just lots more rhetorical questions. Like, yeah, that question was a real tricky one to answer, I think. Yeah, so this is the last bit in the textbook.
像您所说的，现在这个方案，
现在这个方案
发达国家又不接受的，
发达国家又不接受的话, so his proposal, if developed countries do not accept it,
如果他就这么拖下来，
如果他就这么拖下来, so they'll 拖下来, 拖 meaning to drag. Here it's kind of like drag in the sense of 拖延, right? Delay and just tarry, right? And not do anything productive. What's going to happen if that happens? You're not going to improve the climate, so you have to accept unfavorable policy, do you not?
这几年下去，会不会就情况变得更糟了？
Yeah, the situation will get worse, will it not?
我很乐观。
Yeah. All right. 他很乐观. This is actually quite similar to what's in the textbook now. Yeah. So very much it's the same in the textbook. It's probably very close to character for character identical. So his argumentation is that humans, when faced with climate change, inevitably will act. We're not saving the Earth, we're saving humanity. And he comes up with this hypothetical scenario where we just let it run wild and wipe ourselves off. So at some point we've got to say, okay, we can't just wipe ourselves off the planet for greater profit and development and things. Yeah, it seems like this is the same as the textbook. Yeah, that last part is the same as the textbook. I think almost character for character identical, if not identical. Yeah, that's an interesting interview, right? All right. So that's a starting point. I think I'll call this video short because I just had my lunch and I like to have a bit of a rest after lunch. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. See you in the future. Yeah, in the next video we can delve more deeply into this because yeah, it's an interesting interview, but the textbook does modify it a little bit. So it's worth looking into. And I'm also interested in looking into the research paper as well. I say research paper, and I'm not sure if it's a research paper, actually. It's more like a policy paper or a position statement or something. I'm not sure. We'll have to look into this. All right. See you next time, TTFN.